Morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate that we've got a whole lot of things to cover this morning and probably not a lot of time to do it in, so I'm going to get started quite quickly. As Neil mentioned, I want to leave a good amount of time at the end for any questions, so please submit them. This topic I don't think necessarily works well when it's just given in generalities, and I appreciate there's probably quite a lot of specific questions that you have, so I will tackle them. But let's get started. So my name's Bruce. I'm Live Group's head of content. And really, what that means is that my job is listening to our clients' objectives and coming up with quite measurable solutions that can then help tackle them. It's interesting that it's not a title I see a lot across the industry. I think as event teams get better at tackling with content and seeing it central to their event experience, that will change. But for now, it's nice to kind of feel a little alone in this. I think the core of it comes down to understanding that any little thing with an event, even if it's something as simple as a live stream, can be delivered in probably quite an infinite number of ways, depending on the audience, the speaker, the content, the clients, the objectives, and that for each of those there's probably an optimal way of doing things, and that finding that optimum way is actually valuable. It's worth tracking down, because that's how we're going to demonstrate our value to clients. As an industry, I think we're a little too quick to move on, and we're too quick to jump to what we perceive to be the next big thing. Now, this isn't necessarily the fault of the industry, because a lot of the time on the client side, they are demanding innovation at all points. In the past 2 months, I've been involved in about 5 proposals, and in each of those proposals, one of the key questions, one of the things that's going to define where the contract's awarded has been something to the effect of how will you keep us abreast of the latest and greatest technological innovations? And for each one, our response has been quite similar. It's been, well, we have a digital director, we are horizon scanning, we have a culture of innovation, we get involved in events like this. And those are all true, but if we're being honest with our clients, the answer we should probably give is, why are you so worried about the next generation of technology when you're not using the current generation as you truly and fully can? And that's one of those kind of uncomfortable truths that I think we need to get better at answering. And it speaks to a split in the event industry at large. On one hand, we've got people pushing to find the latest and greatest innovations. All these talks here, the other talks I've attended, there was a gentleman talking about quantum computing, which at the moment is really only done in supercomputer labs, and it's not really going to affect our industry anytime soon, and yet we are trying to grapple with it. And so yes, you have that on one hand, and then on the other, you have the fact that since the advent of smartphones, event agendas haven't really changed much. We've not reacted to that new technology in a way that makes sense. And so this statement is not me trying not to get invited next year. It's the fact that an understanding that we're not some sort of military special ops unit where some immediate technological innovation will be the difference between life and death. Fundamentally, we're about connecting people, whether that's connecting them with brands, with speakers, with ideas, or each other. And that to do that effectively, it's probably not about finding new tools, but using the ones we have slightly better. This little timeline is the total life of any piece of technology. So from the very start, it's sparked from a moment of creativity, it's slowly adopted at large, it matures, it slowly declines, and then it dies. You can chart pretty much any bit of technology against this graph. Take global positioning. So developed in the early 1970s, it saw a bit of limited civilian application in the 1980s. It was only fully operational in the 1990s. And over that time, that 30-year span, it was kind of traipsing through here and here. It was just being introduced and then adopted by more and more people. But I'd argue it didn't really mature until 2004 when Qualcomm announced that they'd managed to get GPS chips working in mobile phones. And once that happened, things began to change. I think innovation, changing the world, only really can be done when technology that we're dealing with is at this maturation point. And although an event like this is typically dealing with things that are kind of just coming into the horizon, that's valuable, it has a place. If we're going to look at content and doing things right, we need to be focused quite a lot in this area. And typically it takes other technologies to cause other ones to die. So if you take VHS used to be the king of home entertainment, master of all it saw, and every single house had a VHS player. And then one day, DVD came into the market. And because VHS was a mature technology, everyone knew what its weaknesses were, and DVD was an answer to those and could come in and be adopted. And by the time that DVDs players were in every house, VHS dropped off. It began to decline and die. And then DVD was king. And then someone whispered about Blu-ray, and Blu-ray began to take over. And now we're not even thinking about optical media. We're looking at streaming as the next technology, which is going to affect things. So it takes something powerful to push something off. It's why GPS is not really being knocked off yet, because there's nothing really that's ready to take its place. Also, launching satellites is quite expensive. And so when we're talking about events, and specifically why virtual events failed the first time round, when we build our event experiences, we're not just dealing with one technology. We're dealing with lots of technologies. If you take a delegate management system, we're dealing with browsers, we're dealing with server-side stuff, what codes are currently out there, even the architecture behind all of that. It's a whole host of technologies, and at the moment, certainly with delegate management, all of those are pretty mature, they're known quantities. When virtual events first hit the scene, a lot of those technologies were still new and nascent. You had Flash plugins, you had the creative tools that were required to build a virtual events experience, and all of that was fairly new. And because just enough of them hadn't quite matured, there was enough weak links in the chain that the entire technology didn't really work. And not only that, when we're talking about the late 90s and early 2000s, the thinking wasn't there either. This was an era before YouTube, and it changed our perspective on how content could be delivered on demand. And because of that, because the industry only had traditional events to work from as a frame of reference, we saw weird things. So the first virtual events I attended from my MacBook way back in the day, you'd arrive at a virtual registration room, and then you'd walk through some venues to arrive at a plenary session as if traipsing through a venue was the event experience that people craved. And that's when it worked at all, because we're talking about an era of not necessarily the fastest bandwidth speeds. Often assets didn't load, or servers died, or you just couldn't get connected. And because the experience was bad, we just, as an industry, just quietly tucked them away. But while that happened first time around, in the background, as we kind of forgot about virtual events and moved on to other things, and the industry kind of put a big emphasis on live streaming as a way of bolting onto events, something was happening in the background. And it's that all those technologies that were at one time new and a little bit rough around the edges began to improve. So browser standards began to improve. HTML5 came in and reduced the need for Flash. Internet speeds improved worldwide. And things like live streaming saw a cultural and technological revolution. Twitch became indispensable, YouTube Live. Everything that was required to make a virtual event great suddenly began to mature. And then one day, at Live Group, this brief comes in. Big audience, spread over the country, little budget, no time at all to do it. And initially, our thoughts were, well, we'll just do a live stream. It's okay, we'll get a studio, we'll bring some speakers, we'll bring the content to them. Especially with the timescales, we wanted to deliver something good, and we wanted to deal with known quantities. But when we begin to actually grapple with the brief and come up with our proposal, that didn't feel right. Live streams can be very in the moment. You have your audience that connects, they watch a bit of content, they share a few thoughts, they disconnect, and then they're done. And when interaction happens, it's typically with the speakers via an app like the one we have here, or if it's got something like a chat room, everything's moving at such a pace that no one can connect with each other. And if we're talking about creating a community, we needed something more, something better. And so we began to think about what we could do in terms of a virtual event. And whenever you're looking at a digitally driven event solution, there's a stigma that is associated with it. And I hear it all the times when we're working on live streams, is this question comes in from clients such as, well, how do I know they're paying attention? How can I guarantee that the people on the computer are actually really getting involved with the content? I don't want to pay money for people just to tune in and ignore it. And it's a valid concern. But interestingly, when we're talking about traditional events, I don't see that same question crop up. If I, as an organizer, have a room that can fill 500 people, and I get 500 delegates in that room, the client's pretty happy, generally. They don't seem to care that most of them are on their smartphones, a few of them have snuck out a laptop, and maybe one or two are asleep. The fact that the room's full is good enough for them. And it's so strange. People really care about the things that are immediately in front of their face. And so when you're talking about a digital event solution where there is no audience, suddenly they can worry about something else. So instead of worrying about people arriving and getting their badges and finding a nice comfortable seat, they naturally worry about the content. When they should be worrying about the content all the time. That's really key to making this work. Now, I've done events where we've had 200 people in the room and about 6,000 watching online, and still the clients only really care about the people in the room. We need to change perceptions on this, that actually, with a stream, yes, you are competing for people's attention. If they're in an office, you've got office noise, coffee runs, emails. You are in that competition. The same is still true if you're running a traditional event. And actually, the only really key difference there is content. That your content needs to suit the medium that you're using, and if you do that, well, then you're winning. You can't approach a virtual event like a typical conference and expect it to work. And that's ultimately why we proposed a virtual event, is that we had faith in our ability to build content for that particular medium and platform. Now, these are the pillars that we built our solution on, and if there is a secret for success in virtual events, I think this is nearly there. I'm not saying it's perfect, and I think there's a lot of understanding we still need to apply in the future. But briefly, and each of these pillars on our website, there's a full in-depth video and a case study which goes into each of these in a lot more detail. I will take a top-level approach, but essentially, we communicated with people in an open, human way. We didn't go to kind of stock-generated emails. We tried to actually build a connection with them to get them onto the platform, and then once we were there, we tried to still talk to them to explain what the value of the virtual event would be. We empowered the audience, so we gave them the option to make content selections, but also influence the types of sessions that they would be attending. We also let them share with each other. And when we're talking about a community, we gave them the ability to add content in it, to vote on it, to add comments and things like that. We had a full-day broadcast that was made up of 3 separate content streams that people could attend, in addition to smaller virtual breakout rooms, so there was always something that people could engage with. And then after the event itself, we had a content plan that stretched into the future, past the event of the broadcast, where people could still come back and engage and get involved. Now, as my slide crashes, there we are. We understood with the website that there was a danger that we were bringing too much assumed knowledge to the equation. So Live Group, we have our own delegate management platform. We build websites all the time, and we build them for people registering for typical events and live streams. And that would guide our thinking. And there's a danger in that because it's a virtual event. It's something different. It's not a traditional event, and it's not a live stream. And so we went back to first principles, kind of looking at it with fresh eyes and how we could build a website. And actually, this is probably one of the things I'm really biased on, is with how specific the requirements are for each client and each content piece. I'm not sure how much value an out-of-the-box solution brings to a virtual event space. I know people have got products out there that seek to answer that, and I want to learn more about them. But we were dealing with a client who wanted to really fine-tune things for their audience, and the fact that we controlled everything was quite key to that. So when we wanted to really get into the minutiae of changing the pages, we could do so. But for the website, from the moment you arrived, you were given a video explaining what each of the part of the site did, how you can interact with it, the value of it. Delegates were guided from the experience. We had these 2 strands of content, first from us and the client on high, where we were giving them advice and guidance, and the second, which was from the community, where the content that they were adding, and this was very much taken from the Reddit model of creating communities, understanding that you can't actually try and create communities from on high. You can only create environments where communities can be created. The build itself of the website took 2 weeks, which is a pretty rapid development. But nevertheless, with the timescales that we were dealing with, we knew that we wanted to have at least a month where people could engage with the content before the day of the broadcast. And that broadcast was pretty all-encompassing, so a real hive of activity. So I mentioned, because we had this website, we had all these content streams. And so we were really fortunate with the live element. We could ask ourselves, why do it live? When you're publishing content, if you've just got someone speaking to slides, that's great, that's valuable, but if it can be done on demand, do it on demand. For the live stream itself, we had constant interaction with the audience, whether it's taking place in polls, sending questions to the speakers, giving them the power to get involved, and that then spread out to the breakout sessions where people could question each other in smaller chat rooms without enough people that it could drown out. It lasted a full day. Over the 3 streams, we generated a huge sum of content, and even this was with a relatively small audience. 1,300 delegates over the few streams. For a digital event, it's not necessarily giant, but because they had lots of content selections, there were lots they could do. I do think that these stats really speak for themselves. They're not perfect. There is learnings that we took from this project that we would like to take forward and improve upon, and in fact, since doing this, we've delivered 2 other virtual events, one for UK government and one for different private sector clients that have taken those learnings forward, and we are getting better at it because we're using mature technology to deliver on it. And I guess those learnings are the ones I want to share with you. If you're going to look and plan your own virtual event, get involved with it, you don't need necessarily an event organizer like us. You know, we're keen to get involved in it. But this is something that everyone could do. Digital tools are hugely democratized now, and anyone can get involved in this. But first principle, know what you want to do and know your limitations. You might not need a virtual event. You shouldn't go into any event scenario thinking, well, I need X, I need a webcast, I need a traditional event, I need a one-to-one meeting. You should be thinking, what am I trying to do? What do I want my audience to be thinking and feeling? And I'm biased about this because this is fundamentally my job with clients. And then once you have those answers, you're going to begin to build out your limitations. So I want people to feel great about this new product launch, but I have no money, I have no time. Well, then we can look at the right solution. And for some of them, a virtual event is going to be the right solution. Virtual events are not going to replace traditional events anytime soon, but what they are going to do is widen the toolbox for planners and clients with what they can bring to the table to accomplish their goals. And you can't do this, certainly in a virtual event context, without giving your audience some power. If you're just going to be talking at your audience, you don't really need a virtual event because you're not empowering them. You have to give people the ability, if they're watching at the end of a computer, to get involved, to have a say, to share their views and opinion. You have to have faith that that will change the content in a powerful way. A lot of clients are very hesitant about empowering the audience this way, but it's something that's quite critical, I think, to do. And that leads me to caring about content. And you have to want to build content that matters and can be delivered in a virtual way forward. It's not just a case of saying, okay, well, we've got virtual events, going to last a day, we've got a few speakers that might be interesting. No, that a lot of that planning, probably about 80 to 90% of it, has to be devoted to that content first. You're going to want to bring them back. To understand that once the live stream element of that virtual event is over, that people are going to have a reason to come back to get engaged again and share their views all over again. This is the trickiest part about virtual events and probably events in general, is once that event is over, when you've given them a day, something to rally around, people don't want to come back. Because if it's just going to be watching a recording of a live session, it's not necessarily a great value proposition for them. So for our project, we had a whole host of other original content that we were only going to publish after the fact, which took a great leap of faith from the client. If you're paying money to produce content, you don't want to put it out in an area where you risk not getting the highest audience. But then that comes to your comms plans and your marketing teams and how you actually then draw people back. You have to give them something. And finally, kind of throughout all of this, is this question of why do it live? If you're going to do anything, certainly digitally live, what is the benefit of doing it in that format? How are you going to question the audience? Are you going to bring in live speakers from the world over? How are you going to actually leverage the fact that you're doing it live in a way that makes it more effective? Because if you're not introducing a live element where you're letting people interact in the moment, you may as well just do a content hosting platform with a load of videos and track viewership that way. And so building the content around the live experience becomes absolutely key. And that's it. Those are the learnings. I've just given a whirlwind tour of virtual events, and I appreciate that a lot of this has to be delivered personally, but I really want to kind of get to some of your questions. And there's a good number of them, which is really nice. Is there a single tech solution to embrace all features needed for a full-scale virtual event? Short answer is absolutely. There are some out-of-the-box packages that companies are working, but I'm going to be a little bit skeptical and maybe a little bit cynical in terms of if the all-in-one solutions have to be, by their nature, good enough for everyone. And because they're good enough for everyone, they're not going to get into the minutiae of the particularities of a brief. They're not actually going to answer your question. I've dealt with certain clients who have, and one of the last virtual events we did was targeted at executive leadership. Now, the expectations from executive leadership, from what they expect from a web platform, is so different from your average kind of low-level core business people that we've typically dealt with virtual events. So we have to build a more premium environment around it. So there are, but if you're going into them and you're speaking to people that can offer you an out-of-the-package virtual event solution, I think my advice to you would be really be sure with them how you can customize it to your needs, whether that's from content, styling, or everything, and you want complete control and never cede that. What do you do when the tech or links or platform go wrong? You try and have a plan for that. That's really the big problem with a virtual event, is that you're going to have things go wrong. Some of it is going to be how you reply in the moment. So maybe it's part of the website, your gamification element isn't working as well as it should. Well, then you need to address things quite quickly. It comes back to the control that you have. When it comes to live streams, if you're working with a partner, ask them what their backups are and what their backups to their backups are. Going into our event, the CBS one, we knew that we had multiple stream backups and tech backups. But if everything went wrong, we would just record the day as a live event and then broadcast it after the fact, and then do a follow-up event in a much lower budget studio to actually use that audience interaction. I mean, things will go wrong, but much like if you ran an event and someone cut the power to a building, reacting to that is just part of how you plan these. What's the one bit of tech you would recommend for a successful virtual event? Audience interaction platform. You need something that lets you talk to them and get involved. See you at the back. It's really good. It's really key. If you're not empowering the audience to talk to the people at the other end of it or talk to each other, you've missed a trick. Absolutely essential technology. What do you do if some of the delegates don't speak English? Really valid question. This is an absolutely great one. We've ran several where we're doing simultaneous translation with translation booths, so you can pick from one of 4 languages. That's really tricky when you've got people that are speaking different languages. And I think there's a technology platform that I know of where there's auto-translation elements that are being put in. Super valuable. If you're going to create an event virtual, it's global, people speaking different languages, you need something that's going to answer that. And this is where technology can help make things better and even more powerful. Do you believe in virtual events to generate fear of missing out for on-site events? I mean, FOMO is a weird beast, and that's always a thing we hear from people. Well, if I do a live stream, no one will show up to the actual event, when actual reality, that's not really how people work. There is a particular value proposition from attending things in person, and there is a particular value proposition when people are attending things virtually. I don't think it's going to be FOMO that makes the difference here. What I do think is while the outside world changes, where things like the climate crisis escalate and justifying actual transport for high-level people becomes harder and harder, virtual events will come in to fill that niche. And it's not going to be a case of creating a fear of missing out for the on-site. Do latency and internet lag cause problems? They can. They absolutely can. The biggest one is certainly when you're doing any sort of live polling. If you've got a good streaming CDN, you can be dealing with a delay of around about 30 seconds to 90 seconds. And if you've got that, you need to make sure that when you're planning the interaction with your speakers, that you're factoring that in. So typically it's with polls, and whenever I'm dealing with a speaker that wants to introduce a poll, I'm ensuring that in their talk, they're introducing the poll, they're giving a little bit more of their talk, and then they're coming to the results of them. So you're factoring the latency into everything. You have to be mindful of it. It is a limitation, and it's not going to change. What do speakers need to do differently when in virtual versus face-to-face? Understand that talking to a camera is very different than talking to a lovely audience, that they are two different skill sets, and that when you've got someone that's really good in front of a crowd, they might freeze up in front of camera. But that's why you use the benefits of a studio, things like auto cue, things like pre-planning and rehearsal days to make sure you get the best out of them. And also understand that the most boring thing that they can do is be a little box while there's a big PowerPoint slide going on, because it's just not making the best use of a live production environment. Do you build existing bespoke for your virtual events, or do you use existing platforms or tools? We build everything bespoke. That's our bias. We think that's quite important for getting the absolute most out of everything, because we want to control every little part of it. That's not to say that existing platforms and tools don't have their place. They absolutely do, but we like to have complete control. How important is it to work with clients and speakers to share and develop the different skill sets needed to lead and run virtual events? This will be my last question, I think, because I've not had a tick from the back. But that's fine, just let me talk forever. It's really important. That's where I want to actually, if we're doing a virtual event, while this website and our lovely teams are working on the website in the background, all of my time was devoted to working with the clients and speakers to understand how this would impact their event and what they needed to do differently. If we're ever in a situation where speakers are only grappling with the fact that they're doing a virtual event a week in advance, that's when I know we have a horrible problem and that we're not going to get the best out of them. So it's something I'm absolutely mindful of. How do you address change management needs to shift client expectations of how an event should be executed, such as moving from on-site to virtual? It comes from employee engagement. I think one of the most valuable things that we've done is we've introduced some of our new clients to some of our existing clients, because it's all well and good me saying, oh, actually, virtual events are very different, and you need to be thinking a different mind space, and you need to take the learnings that we've taken on board. There's always a little bit of cynicism with us saying that, whereas if we introduce them to our existing clients, some of the people that we've done virtual events for, they begin to see it as a lot more credible, and they begin to take those learnings on a lot more. So that's how we've addressed it. But that's it. I hope you found it valuable. I've got this last slide, which I know the lovely Vision Mix guy is going to flick on right now. Sorry, I didn't cue you. I'm a horrible monster. So yeah, if you want to know more, grab me. I'm going to be around the show floor for a little bit, or just message me on LinkedIn. It's a great way to meet me. I can talk about this all day, as you may have gathered, and I appreciate there's probably a load more questions and thoughts on this. But thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it, and have a lovely rest of your conference.